Hi, I'm Ian Knauer. Welcome to the Knauer Farm. After a decade of traveling the world in search of the best food, I realized that the way that we cook and eat right here is not just down-home country cooking, it's world-class food. And it's the picture of what American food should be. Cooking this way is like returning to a healthier and more fulfilling lifestyle. The farm has been in the family for hundreds of years. It's nurtured us for generations. We have some really good times here. And the food that we eat and cook enriches our lives. We live off this land, and I'll show you how sustainable it is. We grow, raise, and hunt everything we eat right here. In a way, it's like returning to a time before grocery stores and fast food fixes. It's fun, it's rewarding, because it is a ton of hard work. But at the end of the day, we sit down to some pretty incredible meals. I'm Ian Knauer, and this is what I do. Now that the weather's cooler, everybody wants to eat really satisfying meals. My sister's coming for dinner tonight and she's a vegetarian, so that gives me an opportunity to cook with some of the produce that we gathered from the garden now that the weather's a little cooler. I'll start off with some kale chips. Now this is just kale, olive oil, and a little bit of sea salt. They crisp up in the oven and get crunchy. They're almost like potato chips, but they're much better for you than potato chips. For the main dish, I'll make a vegetable stew. This is a Moroccan-inspired stew, almost like a tagine. Big chunks of butternut squash, carrots that cook until they're velvety, even a can of tomatoes that I canned last summer for a little bit of acid. I'll cook that with some warm spices like cinnamon, coriander, and cumin. Then as a side dish, I'll make a wheat berry salad. Now this is a whole grain, the whole wheat grain. I'll boil that in some salted water, toss that with a vinaigrette, some parsley leaves, and a bell pepper just for color and crunch. For dessert, I'm gonna make a sweet potato pie. This is like a pumpkin pie, but even better. I'll top that with some salted pecans so you get a nice sweet salty mix, and then a marshmallow frosting. And I'll brown that with a blowtorch. It's almost like making s'mores inside. It's a really fun way to cook. This is going to be a really hearty, satisfying meal. Even though it's a vegetarian meal, no one is going to miss the meat. Kale and other dark leafy greens are some of the only produce in the garden that actually benefits from a light frost. We got a little dusting of snow last night, which means that this kale will be a little more tender than it was and a little less bitter. It'll be perfect for our kale chips. I've got a couple of kids coming over for dinner tonight, and it's always a struggle to get kids to eat their dark leafy greens. I know when I was a kid, I didn't like collards, I didn't like kale. Of course, I love them now, but it took a couple years. This is a really easy way to get anyone to fall in love with kale. We're gonna make kale chips. Now you can use any kind of kale for this. What you wanna do is you wanna get rid of that rib that runs all the way down the center of the kale. You just want the leaves for this. So I've got my kale in a bowl. I'm gonna drizzle it with about 2 tablespoons of olive oil and a big pinch of salt. There are lots of little curves and crevices in this, so you want to take a couple seconds and make sure that this is evenly coated with the oil. I'm going to put this kale onto some baking sheets or in a roasting pan and make sure that it's in one layer. You don't want multiple layers of kale, otherwise they'll just steam, and we want them to get nice and crisp. I have my oven on low. It's at 225 degrees. I'm going to put this right in there. I'll be back in just a few minutes to check on these. Okay, it's been about 8 minutes. And it's looking really done. It's looking nice and crisp, but still green. So I'm gonna take this out. And you can see, these are so crisp that they just crumble in my hands. That's what you're looking for. As soon as these cool to room temperature, they will be as crispy as a potato chip. So I'm just gonna put them in a bowl, and I'll put this bowl right on the table. People can just help themselves. I've got a lot of sweet potatoes in the cellar. This pie only requires 2, so I've got 2 medium sweet potatoes. I'm gonna wrap them up in aluminum foil, stick them right in a 350-degree oven. They'll take about an hour to get really soft and tender all the way through. Now I'm gonna make my pie crust. This is an all butter crust. Now a lot of people like to use lard in their crust to make it extra flaky, but I love the flavor of butter. First, I take 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. Add about a half a teaspoon of salt, a generous pinch. And then I take 1 stick of butter, cut it up into little cubes, and put that in with the flour and the salt mixture. Then I'm going to quickly work that together, so I'm sort of smearing the butter in with the flour and the salt. And I want to end up with roughly pea-sized lumps of butter. So I don't want to work this too much, first of all because I don't want to melt the butter, but secondly because I want those chunks of butter in. So this only takes a minute or 2. Then I'm going to add 3, maybe 4 tablespoons of cold water. Stir that together with a fork. And you can see it's coming together here. So now I've touched this dough enough. I still have nice big chunks of butter in there, but I don't want to heat it anymore with my hands. So I take a piece of plastic wrap, put that on my work surface, and then I'm going to dump this dough out onto the plastic wrap. Now a lot of people will have you smear this pastry with your hands to distribute the butter, but again that doesn't work for me. When I do that I end up with a tough dough that isn't flaky. So this is the technique that I use. I fold this plastic wrap up around the dough and gently press on it with the palm of my hand. And I move around the dough, folding it in on top of itself. Now that actually makes a couple little layers in there. So you get flour, butter, flour, butter, flour, butter. Now I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator for about an hour, let it chill, let it relax, and then I'll come back and roll it out. So my dough is chilled for an hour. That's an important step because it lets that butter firm up again and it also lets it relax. I'm going to take a little bit of flour, get rid of this plastic wrap, just dust this on both sides, and then flour my rolling pin. And now I'm going to, with even firm pressure, just roll it out into a round. Now if you're measuring, this is going to be about an 11-inch diameter round. Nice and even. Now I have a 9-inch pie plate here. And a nice trick is put your rolling pin right in the center and fold the pastry over the rolling pin. Pick it up, scoot that pie plate under there, and just roll it back out. Now that the dough is in the pan, I'm going to press the dough with my fingers into the bottom of the pan, just to make sure that it's in contact with the pan everywhere. Now I'm going to take a pair of scissors, you can do this with a knife too, and just trim the edge of the pastry so that it's about an inch over the edge of the pan. Now that it's nice and even, I'm going to fold that overhang underneath on top of the lip of the pan, working all the way around. And then gently, with my pointer finger and my thumb, I'm going to move them in opposite directions around the lip of the pan, just to make a nice little crimp. Finally, I want to take a fork and make some holes in the bottom. Those are steam holes. The water that I put into this pastry is going to cook out, and I want it to be able to escape. So now I'm going to take a piece of aluminum foil, put that right on top. And I have some pie weights here. These are ceramic pie weights. I'll put those in there. And what this does is it weighs down the pastry so that you don't get bubbles in the pastry. You want a nice flat surface on the bottom. And what we're doing now is we're going to blind bake the pastry. That way it'll be cooked all the way through by the time we put our filling in. So this will go into a 350-degree oven for about 25 minutes until the pastry's set. It's been about 25 minutes. My pastry shell is probably set by now, so I just want to take those pie weights out and then let it keep baking until it's golden brown. So our pie crust is golden brown now. It's time to come out of the oven. And these sweet potatoes are ready too. I'm just gonna take them out of their aluminum foil package and just peel the skins right off. I'll put these in a bowl, and then I'll take a potato masher and just mash them up. Now, you can do this in a food processor and make a puree. Then you'll have a really nice smooth filling, but I actually sort of like the rusticity of the chunk. I want to know that this is sweet potato pie, not just some pumpkin puree. So I have these mashed up. I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar, 1 cup of heavy cream, 1/2 cup of whole milk, 2 large eggs, crack those right in there, big pinch of salt, and about a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Now I'm just going to whisk this all together, and then I'll pour it into our pre-baked pie shell. Now this is pretty full, so I'm going to carefully take this to the oven. That'll take about 45 to 50 minutes to cook all the way through and set. We'll continue on with our recipe. This is where it starts to get really fun. Now that the pie is in the oven, I want to make a layer of salty pecans to put between the pie and the topping. That way, with every bite, you get sweet and salty. It helps balance the whole dessert. So I'm going to start out with 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Put that in my pan and wait until it's melted. Then I'm going to add about a cup of pecans. Now these are whole, so I'm just going to crumble them with my hands right into that butter. This pan's over medium-high heat. And then maybe 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. A nice generous pinch of salt, probably about a teaspoon in total. I'm just going to cook this. This sugar is going to melt into the butter. These nuts toast a little bit and they suck up that salt. Again, what we're going for here is a salty nut layer for our pie, so don't be afraid to use a little extra salt in this. This only takes a minute or 2. And now that it's done, I'll just take it off the heat and come back to it when I'm ready to use it. This is the final component to our pie. We're going to make a meringue topping. Now I've got 3 egg whites here. I'm going to add a pinch of salt to them. That helps break them up. And then I start whisking them over a pot of barely simmering water. Now this is going to very gently cook these egg whites. And I'm going to add a total of 3/4 cup of sugar to these egg whites as I beat them. but I'm going to add it a quarter cup at a time. This is the toughest job in the kitchen today. By the end of this, my arm is going to ache. But I can already see the volume of this increasing, so I'm going to add the rest of the sugar. Now, I've been doing this for a couple minutes now, 3 or 4, and it's time to finish the job. So now I can just take this bowl over and finish it with the stand mixer. Okay, we're here. You can tell because these peaks, that's what they're called, they stand up, but the very tip of it falls over. And that's what we're looking for. Now, it's time to assemble our pie. So our pie is nice and cooled. We've got our pecans here, our buttered, salty pecans. I'll sprinkle these pecans over top of the pie. And then we'll put the meringue on top of that, so it goes sweet, salty, sweet. With every bite, you get all those flavors. Scoop this meringue on top. It looks like marshmallow fluff. Just sort of spread it out. You don't want to go all the way to the edge. And then make little dollops, little curlicues on top there. Now this is my favorite part of this pie because I get to play with the torch. And then carefully, just toast that marshmallow. Just want to get the edges rounded everywhere. And you really start to see those curlicues that you made in the marshmallow. And that's it. Now this pie is ready to go, and this is everybody's fall favorite pie. Now that the weather's a little cooler, my stomach gets a hankering for comfort food. Braised meat always hits the spot, but vegetables can be just as satisfying. My sister, Cecily, who's coming for dinner tonight, is a vegetarian, so I'm going to make a vegetable stew for her that any meat lover would be tricked into believing is just as satisfying as meat. I'm going to start out by smashing 5 cloves of garlic and then coarsely chopping those garlic cloves. And then I'm going to cut up an onion. This can just be a rough chop. Now I'm going to take 3 leeks and cut off the dark green parts. Those dark green parts are too tough to chew, but I'm going to save them because they're really great in stocks. So you want to cut these in half lengthwise and then just rinse the layers under cold running water. Now I'll just cut these crosswise into 1/4 inch thick strips. So now my garlic, my onion, my leeks, all chopped and ready to go. I'll take these out of the stove and start to cook them. I'm going to cook those in about 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil over medium-high heat. Probably about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Cook that, add some black pepper. And while this is cooking, I'll chop the rest of my vegetables. Now I've got my butternut squash. Now, this might seem a little intimidating to tackle, but it's really not that tough. You want to break it into pieces. You have the neck, which is solid, and then the bottom, which has the seeds in it. So I just cut it in half, right where it starts to curve. And then with your vegetable peeler, just peel off that skin. It's a little tougher than carrot skin, but you'll get through it. And then with a spoon, I'm just going to scoop out those seeds. I'll take all these peelings and seeds and throw them right in the compost. Now I want to cut my vegetables into large chunks. Got my butternut squash. These are about 2-inch pieces, really hearty. There's something really nice about having big chunks of vegetable. My carrots I like to cut these on a diagonal. Now I've got those kale stems that I saved for my kale chips. I'll just cut those in small pieces. And finally, I've got 8 dates. And the reason that I'm adding these is because they add a really gentle, subtle sweetness. All these veggies go in the pot. Put that in there along with about 3 cups of water. Now it's time to add the spices. These are really warm spices. I've got about 2 teaspoons of coriander, 1 teaspoon each of smoked paprika and turmeric, 2 teaspoons of cumin, 2 cinnamon sticks, and about 5 bay leaves, 4 or 5 bay leaves. And I've got a can of tomatoes. I canned these last summer. Pop that open, put those in. Now, I have a pound of chickpeas. It was a dried pound of chickpeas. I soaked these overnight. I'll pour those in. I'm gonna bring this up to a boil and keep it at a simmer for about an hour. We'll cook it covered, and all those vegetables will stew together. And this will be a really satisfying, cool weather vegetarian stew. Grain salads are perfect for the cooler weather. They're really satisfying. You can serve them warm or at room temperature. And I'm gonna be making a wheat berry salad to go with our stew. So I'm gonna add it to some water and a little bit of salt and just cook that for about 45 minutes on the stovetop. While my wheat berries are cooking, I'll make a quick dressing. Start out by finely chopping a small shallot. Put that in the bowl. And then I'm gonna squeeze the juice of a whole lemon over top of that. I'm doing that first over the shallot because the lemon juice will help to bring the rawness out of the shallot. Now I've got an orange bell pepper here. Just cut that off the seeds, put the seeds to the side, and then cut the flesh of the pepper into about a ½ inch pieces. And put that in the bowl too. I'm gonna add a generous pinch of salt, some pepper, and 3 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil. So now the dressing is made, my wheat berries are done cooking. I'm gonna add these wheat berries hot, right off the stove, to the rest of the salad ingredients. What happens is they suck up the flavors of that vinaigrette really easily when they're warm. So I'll toss this together. Then I'm just gonna take a bunch of flat leaf parsley and tear off the leaves. And that's it. Take this to the table, really satisfying cooler weather salad. We did a lot of cooking today. Let's go over a few of the recipes. First, we made some kale chips. I used 1 bunch of curly kale, about 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and a big pinch of salt. That got baked in the oven in a single layer at 225 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes, just until it's crispy. To make the vegetable stew, I started out with 5 cloves of garlic, finely chopped, 1 onion chopped, and 3 leeks. I'll cook those in about a 1/4 cup of olive oil, add about 1½ teaspoons of salt, and 3/4 teaspoon of finely ground black pepper. Then, once that's good to go, I'll add my butternut squash that's cut into big chunks, about ½ pound of carrots, and my kale stems from my kale chips. Then I'm gonna add 8 dried pitted dates, along with 3 cups of water, and then my spices. 2 teaspoons of ground coriander, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of ground turmeric, 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, 2 cinnamon sticks, and 5 bay leaves. I'll add that to the stew along with a quart of canned whole tomatoes in their juice and a pound of soaked chickpeas. Simmer that for 1 hour, season it to taste, and bring it to the table. That's a few of the recipes that we cooked today, but you can see them and so many more at ianknauer.com.